That dress cost $3.98 in the summer of 1954. A young schoolteacher bought it with what was left of her Saturday paycheck, and it has lasted more than 70 years. Now think of the last piece of clothing you bought online. Will it make it to next Christmas? In today's video, we are going to walk slowly through 10 forgotten American clothing brands from the 1950s. The names you'd find sewn inside your mother's everyday dresses or folded inside your grandmother's hope chest. Brands that have disappeared so completely that even the factories where they were made have been torn down, paved over, forgotten. They weren't luxury labels. They weren't expensive. Most of them were within reach of any ordinary working woman. The farm wife, the school teacher, the secretary in the typing pool, the young mother making coffee at 5 in the morning. Women who didn't have much, and yet somehow always looked like they belonged in a magazine. And here is the quiet truth almost nobody says out loud anymore. Even when those clothes were affordable, they were built to last a lifetime. Today, even the expensive ones often don't survive a single season. Before we open this old wardrobe together, if you find comfort in remembering the way American women used to live, the small rituals, the quiet elegance, the dignity of an ordinary day, consider subscribing to Diane's Wardrobe. Every week, we open another door into the world your mother and grandmother knew, the world we slowly stopped living in. Now, let's begin. If you had walked into a Sears in 1955 or thumbed through the dress racks at any small-town five and dime, the first label you would have seen was Nelly Don. It was everywhere. It was on the dress your mother wore to fry bacon in the morning. It was on the dress she changed into before your father came home from work. It was on the dress she wore to back-to-school night, with a small flower pinned to the collar. Nelly Don was founded in 1916 by a remarkable Kansas City woman named Nell Donnelly, who started sewing dresses on her own kitchen table because she was tired of the shapeless, dreary house dresses American women were forced to wear while they cleaned and cooked. She believed a woman doing dishes still deserved to feel pretty. That single idea, that quiet rebellion, built one of the largest dress companies in American history. By the 1950s, Nelly Don had sold over 75 million dresses. Most of them cost between $3 and $7. A young mother in Iowa could own 10 of them. A widow in Tennessee could afford one new every spring and still wear last year's to Sunday service. The dresses had small details: a piped collar, a tiny rickrack trim, a bow at the waist, a row of buttons covered in matching fabric. Small things that made an ordinary Tuesday afternoon feel like it mattered. When the company finally closed its doors in 1978, an entire generation of American women lost something they had taken for granted. The dress that cost almost nothing, the dress that fit, the dress that lasted. If your mother is still alive, ask her if she remembers Nelly Don. Watch what happens to her face when she hears the name. There is a particular silence that follows it, a soft kind of recognition, the way someone smiles when you say the name of an old friend they haven't seen in years. There was a particular kind of Saturday afternoon in 1958 that doesn't exist anymore. A girl, 14 years old, walking through the doors of a downtown department store with her mother, holding the babysitting money she had saved all summer in a small white envelope. She was going to buy something from Bobby Brooks. Bobby Brooks was founded in Cleveland, Ohio in 1939, but it became something close to a religion for American teenage girls in the 1950s. The brand specialized in mix-and-match separates, a wool skirt in dusty rose, a coordinating sweater in cream, a blouse with a small lace collar, pieces that could be combined in dozens of different ways. A girl with 3 Bobby Brooks pieces could feel like she had a whole wardrobe. The clothes were affordable enough that even working-class families could stretch to them. A sweater was around $6. A skirt, maybe $8. But what made Bobby Brooks unforgettable wasn't the price. It was the ritual, the way a girl saved for it, the way her mother let her pick it out herself for the first time, the way she wore it to school the next Monday and felt for the first time in her life like a young woman instead of a child. The original Bobby Brooks Company filed for bankruptcy in 1982. The name still exists today, sold and resold to discount retailers, hanging on racks in warehouse stores. But the clothes that bear that label now have nothing to do with the carefully tailored pieces a girl in 1958 saved her babysitting money to buy. The label is the same. The world it came from is gone. And so is that particular kind of Saturday afternoon when a girl walked into a department store with a small white envelope and walked out a little older than she was when she arrived. If you ever opened a closet in 1956 and counted, there was a very good chance you'd find at least 4 ship-and-shore blouses inside. They were the working woman's quiet armor, the blouse you wore to the office, to church on Wednesday evenings, to lunch with your sister at the Woolworth's lunch counter. The brand was founded in Pennsylvania and became one of the most successful blouse manufacturers in American history. What made Ship-and-Shore extraordinary was the fabric, a drip-dry cotton that could be washed in the sink at night and worn again the next morning, crisp as new. For women without dryers, without much time, without much money, this was a small miracle. A blouse that didn't need ironing. A blouse a tired mother could rinse out at 10 o'clock at night and wear to her secretarial job at 8 the next morning. A Ship-and-Shore blouse cost around $2 or $3. It came with small details, a Peter Pan collar, a tiny embroidered initial above the pocket, a row of mother-of-pearl buttons, a delicate ruffle at the cuff. They were sold at JCPenney, at Sears, at the local Five and Dime in towns whose names nobody remembers anymore. By the late 1980s, the company was gone, swept away by a tide of polyester imports and cheaper alternatives that wore out after 3 washings. Most American women under 50 have never heard the name Ship-and-Shore. But somewhere in your grandmother's closet, behind the coats she never gave away, there is probably still one of those crisp white blouses, folded along its old creases, smelling faintly of starch and cedar, waiting for a morning that isn't coming back. In Paris, in 1956, Christian Dior would unveil a new collection. The dresses cost what a year of rent cost in a small American town. American women read about them in Vogue and sighed. 2 months later, a label called Susie Peret would release something almost exactly like it for $19. Susie Peret was the secret of the American working girl. The brand specialized in beautifully made interpretations of Paris couture, the new look silhouette, the wasp-waisted cocktail dresses, the full skirts that whispered when a woman walked across a polished floor. They were made in New York City, in small workshops, by seamstresses who knew exactly what they were doing. A secretary in Minneapolis who wanted to feel like Audrey Hepburn for an evening could put on a Susie Peret dress, slip into a pair of white gloves, and step into a Friday night that felt almost too elegant for her ordinary life. And the dress would last. It would still hang in her closet 30 years later when her daughter would find it on a quiet afternoon and decide to wear it to her own engagement dinner. Susie Peret closed in 1969. The kind of company that turned Paris dreams into something an ordinary American woman could afford simply doesn't exist anymore. Today, the cheap copies of designer dresses are made overseas, in synthetic fabrics with unfinished seams that fray within a year. Back then, the dream was within reach, and once it was yours, it stayed yours for the rest of your life. Maybe that was the part we lost. Not the dress itself, but the idea that an ordinary woman deserved something beautiful that would not fall apart. Henry Rosenfeld called himself the dressmaker to the masses. He meant it as a point of pride. In 1950s America, that was something to be proud of. Rosenfeld's dresses sold at Macy's, Gimbel's, May Company, and hundreds of regional department stores from Boston to Sacramento. They cost between $9 and $20. They were not designer pieces. They were not couture. They were beautifully made everyday dresses for women who needed to look put together for the PTA meeting, the bridge club, the cousin's confirmation, the trip downtown to pay the electric bill in person, in a clean dress, with a small purse hooked over the forearm. What was extraordinary about Henry Rosenfeld dresses was the attention to small things. The way the bodice was lined, the way the hem was finished with hand stitching, the way the buttons matched the piping on the collar, the way the waistline sat in exactly the right place on a woman's body. These details cost the company more to produce. They put them in anyway, because that was how clothes were made then. Because a woman who paid $12 for a dress was paying for the woman she became when she wore it. When American manufacturing began moving overseas in the 1970s and 1980s, brands like Henry Rosenfeld couldn't survive. They had spent decades building a customer base that expected lined bodices and hand-finished hems, and that kind of garment could no longer be made for $12. The company faded. The name disappeared from the racks. And American women, slowly, almost without noticing, stopped expecting their clothes to be made with care. In 1957, Jonathan Logan was the largest dress manufacturer in the United States. By the late 1960s, it owned dozens of smaller labels: Junior Accent, Misty Harbor, R&K Originals, Rona, Modern Juniors, and it dressed an entire generation of American women. Jonathan Logan dresses lived in the everyday closet. They were the dress you put on to drive your husband to the train station before dawn. They were the dress you wore to a christening on Sunday afternoon. They were the dress that came home in a brown paper Sears bag on the day before your sister's wedding, when you realized at the very last minute you had nothing to wear. They cost between $12 and $25. They were not exciting. They were not loud. That was their entire point. They were the dress you didn't have to think about, the dress that fit, the dress that washed and ironed and hung quietly in the back of your closet, waiting for the moment you needed it. American women in the 1950s owned dresses the way they owned cast-iron skillets, quietly, gratefully, expecting them to last a lifetime. By the 1980s, the company was sold, broken up, dissolved. The factory in New Jersey, where so many of those dresses were sewn, is now a parking lot. American women today spend more on clothing than they ever have, and yet most of them couldn't name a single dress they'd describe the way their mother described her Jonathan Logan: comfortable, flattering, reliable, always there. We bought our way out of that quiet reliability, and we are still trying to figure out what we got in exchange. There is a specific kind of summer dress that disappeared from American closets sometime around 1972, and most women didn't notice until much later, when they reached into the back of an old closet and pulled out something soft, sun-faded, light as breath: a L'Aiglon dress. L'Aiglon was a Philadelphia company that specialized in summer cotton dresses, lawn fabric, dotted Swiss, voile so thin you could see the afternoon sunlight through it. The dresses were cut for movement. A woman walking through her backyard in a L'Aiglon dress, gathering tomatoes from the vine in late July, looked like a painting. The hem moved with her. The fabric breathed against her skin. There was no synthetic anywhere in the dress, not a single thread of it. A L'Aiglon dress cost between $8 and $15 in the 1950s. They were sold at department stores like Wanamaker's in Philadelphia, Hutzler's in Baltimore, Strawbridge, and Clothier. Each one was finished with French seams. The buttons were real bone or pearl. The cotton softened with every washing and never wore out, only became gentler, the way certain things in a long marriage become gentler. L'Aiglon disappeared in the 1970s, swallowed by the polyester revolution and the slow death of the regional department store. Today, there is no American clothing company making summer dresses out of real cotton lawn with French seams for $15. There hasn't been one in 50 years. The dress your grandmother wore on the porch of her house in July, the dress she pulled on over a slip and a pair of bare feet, the dress she stood in while she sliced peaches into a glass bowl, that dress was the last of its kind. Nobody ever made another one. In rural America in the 1950s, there was no department store. There was the Montgomery Ward catalog. It arrived twice a year in a thick brown envelope, and a woman would sit at her kitchen table after the children had gone to bed and turn the pages slowly, marking the dresses she wanted with a small pencil. Most of those dresses were Carol Brent. Carol Brent was Montgomery Ward's house brand of women's clothing. Carol wasn't a real woman. She was an invention, a name that suggested something refined and approachable, the way American catalog companies liked their imaginary women. But the dresses bearing her name were real, and they were everywhere west of the Mississippi. A Carol Brent dress cost between $5 and $12 and arrived a few weeks later in a brown paper parcel tied with string. A farm wife in Nebraska, a coal miner's wife in West Virginia, a young schoolteacher in a small Wyoming town with no train station. These were the women Carol Brent dressed. The dresses were durable, washable, modest, and pretty enough to wear to church. They were the entire wardrobe of millions of American women who lived too far from any city to know what was fashionable in Paris and who would not have cared even if they had known. Montgomery Ward collapsed in 2001. Carol Brent had disappeared from the catalog decades before that, replaced by cheaper, thinner, lesser things. The name doesn't exist anywhere now. But somewhere in a small town in Kansas, in the back of a closet that hasn't been opened in many years, there is still a Carol Brent dress, perfectly preserved, hanging on a wire hanger, waiting for a woman who isn't coming back. Doris Dodson was a young woman's brand. The name itself sounded like a girl you might have gone to school with. The label was sewn into junior dresses, small-sized, slim-cut pieces for teenagers and young brides, and the brand had a particular hold on the heart of the American Midwest. Founded in St. Louis, Missouri, Doris Dodson advertised in 17 magazine throughout the 1950s with delicate illustrations of teenage girls in full-skirted dresses, smiling at unseen boys at unseen dances. The dresses cost around $10. A girl saved for them. A girl wore them to her senior prom, to her first job interview, to the bus station the morning she left for college with a small suitcase in her hand and her mother crying quietly on the platform. What made Doris Dodson dresses unforgettable was not the design alone. Though they were beautifully made, with carefully gathered waists and small embroidered details at the collar, but the moment in a girl's life they marked. The dress you wore the night a boy first held your hand. The dress you wore the morning you left home for the first time. The dress your mother folded carefully into your trunk before she kissed you goodbye on the steps of the train. Doris Dodson is gone. The company closed in the late 1960s, lost in the cultural shift away from junior dresses and towards something faster and looser and less ceremonial. American teenage girls today do not have a Doris Dodson. There is no single dress they will remember 30 years from now and trace with their fingers and find themselves crying about suddenly on an ordinary afternoon. The brand isn't the only thing we lost. We also lost the slow, quiet, ceremonial way a girl used to become a woman. Long before White Stag became a discount label hanging on a rack in a chain store, it was something else entirely. It was a proud Oregon company, founded in Portland in the 1930s, and by the 1950s it made some of the best women's sportswear in the country. White Stag invented things American women now take for granted. Practical women's ski pants, women's outdoor jackets, women's slacks made for actual moving instead of just decoration. In the 1950s, a White Stag wool jacket cost around $20. It was warm, fitted, beautifully cut. A woman in Vermont could wear it for 30 winters and pass it on to her daughter, who would wear it for 30 more. The brand was bought and sold and bought again over the decades. Eventually, in 2003, the name was acquired by Walmart, and today the clothes bearing the White Stag label are mass-produced overseas in synthetic fabrics, sold for almost nothing and forgotten by the next season. The old White Stag. The one your mother might have worn while raking autumn leaves in Maine. The one your grandmother wore on a hunting trip with your grandfather in 1957. The one that smelled faintly of wood smoke and old wool. That company is gone. The clothes still exist, in attics and thrift stores and the back of old closets. But the world that made them no longer exists. We have the name. We have lost the thing. Maybe by now, as you've been listening, you have remembered something. Maybe you have remembered a particular dress hanging behind a particular bedroom door. Maybe you have remembered your mother sitting at the kitchen table on a quiet evening, turning the pages of a catalog with a small pencil in her hand. Maybe you have remembered the smell of cedar from a chest in the attic, and a small white envelope of saved babysitting money, and the careful way a woman in 1956 buttoned her blouse before walking out the door. It is easy watching a video like this one to mistake the feeling for sentimentality, to dismiss it as longing for something that wasn't really that good. But the dresses still exist in attics and trunks and the back corners of old closets. We can hold them in our hands. We can feel that the cotton was real. We can see that the seams were finished. We can read the labels of companies that no longer exist, and we can recognize that something has happened to us slowly over the course of 2 generations, and that whatever it was not entirely an improvement. The women who wore those dresses didn't know they were living through the last years of a certain kind of American womanhood. They were just buying a dress for church. They were just folding clean laundry on a Tuesday afternoon. They were just walking through their lives in clothes that fit, in a country that still made things to last. Maybe they knew something we forgot. If this kind of remembering means something to you, if you find yourself reaching for these old worlds the way one reaches for a soft sweater on a cold morning, stay with us at Diane's Wardrobe. There is more to remember. There always is. Until next time, take care of yourself. And if you still have one of your mother's old dresses folded somewhere in the back of a closet, take it out today. Hold it for a minute. You'll understand.